What's up, everyone? Tara Roberts here with Bleacher Report. I hope that week 10 treated you well. I hope you had Jonathan Taylor and that you didn't get Jonathan Taylored. But we've got a fun show today in case you did get Jonathan Taylored and you need a little pick me up there. We've got mid-season sleepers for the stretch run. These are guys that you can maybe grab off waivers or even potentially trade for if they're already rostered in your league for a little bit of value to give you some trade boost right there. And we've got a good mix of players here at all positions for you to grab. So let's go ahead and dive right in because we've got a good list here to cover. We're going to start off right at the top here and talk about Jaden Higgins is the first player that we will talk about here that you can more so a guy that you would be able to grab off waivers here, with the exception of maybe like Dynasty, obviously there. But it feels like it's finally time for us to start seeing those Texans rookie receivers rising up and taking over here, particularly Jaden Higgins here coming off the very encouraging performance, his best performance of the season here. Now we've seen him step up with Nico Collins out. But what we wanted to see from Jaden Higgins is him actually step up and rise to the occasion alongside Nico Collins. We don't want to watch you produce in the absence of his production. We want to watch you produce while he's thriving as well. And Nico Collins had a fantastic day, right? And not just a fantastic day, an extremely high volume day. He had 15 targets and over 100 yards. So to see him garner his true wide receiver one upside that he offers, and then Jaden Higgins also have a really strong performance with 5 receptions on 7 targets for 42 yards and a touchdown. That was excellent. And that would make him the most second productive receiver on the day behind Nico Collins. That is exactly what we wanted to see here because we kind of talked about this before here. Early in the season, we were talking about rookies. Xavier Hutchinson is a player that we were kind of like, oh, why are the Texans, giving him preference there? But they were showing him preference, and it was ultimately limiting that upside and potential and time on the field for Jaden Higgins here. In this game, Xavier Hutchinson finally didn't have a single target here. Christian Kirk also appeared to have a slightly reduced role here. Houston pulled out the win. They're remaining competitive, and maybe them seeing Jaden Higgins go off in a matchup where they pushed high volume here. They needed that volume in order to win. This was good here. And I know you're probably looking at it and thinking, okay, well, this was a big volume game. Is this something that we can see in the future here? And obviously this was with Davis Mills as well. We trust CJ Stroud. Obviously, they're similar types of quarterbacks. CJ Stroud is a better quarterback here, but Davis Mills doesn't offer anything better than CJ Stroud. It was just a matchup that kind of leaned towards them more relying on the pass and trusting in their wide receivers here. And then when we look at matchups ahead here, we've got some favorable matchups, particularly this week right here with Tennessee. Hopefully we get CJ Stroud back. If we do get CJ Stroud back, we can be rest assured that this was one of CJ Stroud's better performances of the season here. So this is a good matchup here. And when we're looking at rookies in general, we want to, when we see rookies pop, particularly in the midseason, we want to be early on it. We don't want to wait here and then say, okay, prove it to me for a couple of games here, because he's a very talented rookie and he can ascend to being the true wide receiver 2 in this offense here. Moving on to our next player here, we're going to talk about another young player that we can potentially see rising here. It is Malik Washington. Malik Washington's situation, obviously a little bit different than Jaden Higgins there. Higgins is fighting to assert himself in the offense and make himself that clear wide receiver 2. Malik Washington in Miami, on the other hand, he is absolutely the clear wide receiver 2 in that offense. You can see that by the projections there. You see the difference between what we saw with Jaden Higgins, a lower projection because he's got to earn it. We got to trust that that kind of production can repeat from him. At this point, we've got a nice little baseline there. The week 11 projections for him are 8.4 fantasy points in PPR. It's not a ton, but in this economy here, we cannot sniff at that at all. And he's been out shooting that occasionally here, especially over the past 4 games since he's really ascended to be the wide receiver 2 of this offense here. And when we're looking at Malik Washington, again, he's clearly the wide receiver 2 behind Jalen Waddle here. Our only concern there with Malik Washington is that he's got a very low ADOT. It's not fun. He's used in a kind of gimmicky way from Mike McDaniel, who clearly is not going anywhere. Not getting fired apparently anytime soon here, but that's okay. He plays about 50% of his snaps out of the slot, so the lower ADOT is expected there. Production is production. He's had 2 touchdowns in the past 3 games there, and in the past 4 games, and we kind of use 4 games as a reference here because Earlier in the season, we obviously had Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Then Tyreek Hill went down, and we got Darren Waller, who asserted himself as a second look in the offense. So we had Jalen Waddle and Darren Waller. Then Darren Waller gets hurt. In that 4 game mark right there in week 7, that's where we start to look at Malik Washington, because that's where he took over as the second look when Darren Waller got hurt there. So over that 4 game stretch there where he's been operating as the wide receiver too, he's had between 7 and 13 fantasy points. So he's got a fairly safe floor, a little bitty itty bitty ceiling, which is why he's kind of only viable in PPR. I would absolutely not roster him in a standard league, despite him getting the touchdowns. That's cool and all, but we need a little bit more uptick in terms of yardage there. But in full PPR, we've got no problems because the receptions are coming in at a pretty decent rate here. But really, why we like Malik Washington and his potential here, and why you want to invest in him now, grab him off waivers, hold on to him, because even if you are not actually physically playing him right now because you've got plenty of guys that you feel good about, hold on to him rest of season for your playoff push right there, because Miami's rest of season schedule is much better. In their defense, we shouldn't be too surprised at them turning things around recently, because the early season schedule that they had was very brutal. It gets very easier as the season goes on here. In week 15, looking specifically at the playoff schedule, they face Pittsburgh. We've talked about Pittsburgh before. Obviously, it can fluctuate, but in general, they have been an extremely pass-friendly defense. And again, weather shouldn't be a concern because that's in week 15, so we typically don't have to worry about that. A lot of times with Miami and Tua Tagovailoa, once we get into that week 17, 16, and they're in those, super cold games, it's not it becomes a major issue for him. But after Pittsburgh, they go back home week 16, the holy grail of matchups against Cincinnati, week 17 at home again against Tampa Bay, which does encourage the pass because everyone's got to keep up with Baker Mayfield and Emeka Ibuka there. So the playoff schedule as a whole, very positive there. We can finally expect perhaps some good playoff consistency from Tua Tagovailoa, because we have definitely not been able to trust him in the fantasy playoffs before. But this is finally the turnaround point for that. And again, Malik Washington has a certain level of volume that we can trust. So if we can get him into those better matchups there, he can actually be a viable flex option for you. Let's go on to one more. And then I do want to read one comment for the chat here. Sports Watcher said they had Jonathan Taylor. Awesome. Congratulations. I had Jonathan Taylor in 2 leagues, and man, that was a blessing. It feels good when you got one of those players that you've got out there and you just, start off your week and you feel super good right off the bat there, knowing that it was the morning game right there. So knowing that right off the bat there, you're just setting sail for the rest of the day. That was wonderful. Moving on to our next player, though, we've got Theo Johnson. This is one that I love. It's a little low key stash. He's about 40% rostered or so in fantasy leagues. So this might be a situation where maybe he's not on waiver wires and you have to go and make a little low-key trade to get him, but it's going to be worth it there. Again, this is a guy where we want to parse out the production and look at him in a specific time frame here. Since week 4, that is when he became a consistent presence within the Giants offense here. He's had 5 double-digit fantasy points in 7 games there, ranging from 10 fantasy points to 21 fantasy points. When you look at it from that perspective, he's not only a tight end streaming option, technically speaking, he's putting up production that makes him a very viable flex option as well. And the reason that we narrow it down to that little window of him at week 4, not just because that's when he became a prominent piece of the offense, because that is also the game that Jackson Dart started his first start there. So we see a very clear pattern here. Earlier in the season with Russell Wilson, offense was a little chaotic and whatnot, up and down, whatnot. But then once we finally got Jackson Dart in there, great rapport with Theo Johnson. Obviously, this week, unfortunately, we might not have him with the concussion. But rest of season, the combination of Jackson Dart and Theo Johnson is going to be very strong. And when we're looking at this week in particular here, in case you're worried about the presence of Russell Wilson in this offense there, the one thing that I will say about that is that while it is a concern there, we do have Darius Slayton that is dealing with a hamstring injury. Obviously, at this point, we don't know 100% the timeline on that. But typically speaking, Emeka Ibuka has really been the only outlier of a guy that has played through a hamstring injury. It knocks the rest of them out. You see that with Kayshon Boutte. We've seen it with Mike Evans. You get those hamstring injuries, you're out 2 to 3 weeks at the very least there. So Darius Slayton get the hamstring injury. So even if we get Russell Wilson more than likely quarterback this week, at least it does narrow it down to where it is Wan'Dale Robinson and Theo Johnson, a very nice target funnel. And they're going to have to continue to push volume because, again, this Giants defense, it's struggling. And they're in a little bit of a chaotic spot, obviously, with the firing of Brian Dable this morning. They're going to have to rely on those players that are really coming through as prominent, dependable players in this offense. And Theo Johnson is absolutely one of them. He has had a couple of low floor games. It hasn't been a big issue here because, again, since becoming the regular guy in week 4, he's had 2 floor games that have been about 5 fantasy points. Those were both matchups against Philadelphia, which tells us that is more of a matchup issue of him not being in a good matchup against Philadelphia specifically. Outside of that, again, he has had a nice floor of 10 fantasy points. He scored 4 touchdowns over that time period here. He's become a very reliable option for us. And then again, at this point, when we're talking about players that you want to have for the stretch run, we're talking about leading into the playoffs and the playoffs as well here. We are building rosters for the playoffs. And when you look at the playoff schedule there for the Giants, as bleak as it is overall, and they're not going anywhere, but when you look at the playoff schedule, we've got Washington, Minnesota, Las Vegas. Those are all excellent matchups where he should put up tight end 1 numbers there. I'm going to jump to the chat here real quick and take a couple of questions from Sports Watcher. Should I start Herbert or Stafford? That is a very good question because obviously we've got Matt Stafford who has been on fire, significantly on fire. And Justin Herbert has been reliable in general prior to this matchup. You kind of wonder if it was just the matchup in general. Typically, it's weird because Pittsburgh has been a high volume matchup. You wonder if maybe Pittsburgh's defense played up specifically and tried to stop the pass because Justin Herbert has been so dominant, or if it's the fact that the offensive line has been dealing with injuries that maybe that hindered the pass there. But we're looking at Justin Herbert versus the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 11. And then when it comes to the LA Rams versus Seattle, I tend to lean towards going with, I think you still got to lean towards going with Matt Stafford in this one. Maybe we exercise a little bit of caution. Jacksonville's defense it was gutted last week in the past against Davis Mills. So they're kind of close there. But when we're looking at that matchup with Seattle, divisional matchup, probably going to be a good back and forth there with Sam Darnold, obviously dueling wide receivers there, and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Puka Nacua here. The fact that Matt Stafford and the role that he has been on in terms of having what is it, like near between 10 to 15 touchdowns over the past several weeks here on an incredible roll, a minimum of 4 touchdowns a game. Yeah, I think we got to give the preference there to Matt Stafford until he proves us wrong on that one. Going to the chat here from Jathan. What about Kyle Pitts? I'm slightly lower on Kyle Pitts just because his volume can be inconsistent. I trust him as the second look in that offense, theoretically, but you always got to remember that Bijan Robinson does have a significant amount of pass volume as well. That's how he's been thriving, has been struggling on the ground there. So technically speaking, Kyle Pitts is the third look in the offense. Quarterback situation is a little bit inconsistent, and we have some streaming options. Again, when we talk about guys like Theo Johnson, Jawan Johnson is another one as well that I debated having on this list. They're stepping up as the clear second look in their offense there. So it gives them the preference because, Kyle Pitts has to deal with Bijan and Drake London, and, who can really deal with Drake London, right? So yeah, Kyle Pitts is fine. He's a decent streaming option, but he doesn't offer that same upside that you can get out of a Theo Johnson there. And then one more chat here, and then we'll go to my next player here from JG. I don't know who is the worst coach, Brian Dable or me as a fantasy coach. I can almost guarantee you that it's Brian Dable there. Yeah, we'll give the edge to Brian Dable of being the worst coach. Defend yourself a little bit there because Dable has had, probably the kiss of death of Daniel Jones going over and basically carrying Indianapolis into the playoffs here. Wild as a Super Bowl contender. Wild. Of course, he has Jonathan Taylor, but hey, he had Saquon Barkley back then. So same situation. Jumping back here to our list here. Our next player, though, is JJ McCarthy. JJ McCarthy here. And this is a fun one for me because when I love talking about young quarterbacks. He's not a rookie quarterback, but I mean, it's his first season. So I look at him as like a rookie quarterback, or first season as a starter. So I look at him as a rookie quarterback there. They're fun because this new breed of young quarterbacks, they come in and they have that upside on the ground. So as long as you've got a big arm and upside on the ground, you can get out there and thrive from a fantasy perspective. He's got everything that we want. That's it. We want you to have the big arm. We want you to have the rushing upside. We want you to have an ample bevy of weapons there. It's tough to fail overall when you're throwing to Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, and Aaron Jones. It's got like an embarrassment of riches over there. I mean, my God, who can ask for that? I mean, basically, it's just, like Cincinnati, right? And the pass catchers here in Minnesota, right? So when we're looking at this overall here, JJ McCarthy, obviously not a ton of starts this season, but we had the start from him prior to this week, in week 9, where he finished as QB 13, fine, so borderline QB 1, low volume day, had less than 200 yards. Again, we're not looking for pass volume. We just need big plays and touchdowns on the ground. That's exactly what he gave us. 3 total touchdowns, 1 was on the ground. Then this week was a good barometer, you guys. You might look at it and say this was a terrible performance. The fact that he is QB 14 on the week, obviously pending tonight's games, where, I think one might pass him in this one. Probably, Jalen Hurts, Jordan Love is kind of, they're right there in terms of rankings this week. But with JJ McCarthy giving us a QB 14 performance in a day that was, he threw below 50% in terms of completion rating. He did get about 250 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions there, but he got 5 carries, 48 yards. That's what we care about. If you can get us 4, 5, 6, 7 points on the ground, that is what we need in order to feel comfortable with you. And quite frankly, this should have been a better performance. If you guys watched the game there or saw the highlights of the game, Justin Jefferson was not himself. He had a little George Pickens-esque game there where he kind of gave up on some stuff. Didn't really look like he maybe just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Quite frankly, was whiffing on some plays, dropped a touchdown pass there. So this really should have been a better performance. This should have been a solid QB1 performance there. Again, JJ McCarthy has everything that we are looking for in upside. And again, we talk about the rest of season schedules. That's what we care about here. We are building for the stretch run. The rest of season schedule for Minnesota, you cannot ask for a better rest of season schedule. They have Chicago this week. Green Bay, obviously, that's a little bit of a shaky matchup there. Seattle, that's a team that tends to push volume. Then you get Washington. Dallas, they added weapons, but at the end of the day, we need to see how Dallas comes together. Then we have New York Giants, good matchup there, excellent matchup. And then Detroit. Again, Detroit is the matchup where he finished as QB 13, so that's a fine matchup for him as well. Overall, he should have QB1 upside rest of season here. Yeah, there's more to come here. If you're looking for, and obviously, maybe you've been riding the Joe Flacco wave, and we've got the news that Joe Burrow, his practice window is going to be opened up here. He could be returning soon. So if you need a quarterback, you've been struggling and streaming here, JJ McCarthy can potentially carry you through rest of season here. And to move on to our next player here, it is Tyler Algier. We'll do this one real quick because this one is really simple here. What is the value of Tyler Algier? Well, he is potentially the highest upside handcuff that you can ask for and grab off waivers here or trade for cheap. And he's a high upside handcuff that offers standalone value here. I mean, oddly enough, his odds of getting a touchdown at this point are higher than the odds of Kenneth Walker getting a touchdown. That's painful to say. It hurt me in my heart to say that one out loud. But realistically, if I'm taking a bet and I'm saying which one's going to get a touchdown, yeah, we're taking the touchdown for Tyler Algier at this point, because at least when Atlanta has him on a drive and he's carrying it down to the goal line, we know that they will let him finish the drive and get the touchdown. So, hey, he's been coming through here for us. Is he someone that we want to throw out into our lineup on a weekly basis? No, but if you got to make a desperation heave, it's better than sending Ja'Cory Krusky-Merritt out there, right? At least you got some upside hope there here. But again, 5 touchdowns on the season. He's had 4 double-digit fantasy points this season. It's crazy. But again, he's just a high upside handcuff. And at this point in the fantasy season, you want to be filling up your bench and adding those high upside handcuffs when you get a chance, because the reason that we're doing that is that at this point, how much fab do you have left? Do you want to be fighting someone on waivers here? No. you want to be going and grabbing a guy that is already on your bench because Bijan Robinson went down and you don't have to fight waivers. You've already got Tyler Algier on your roster. And obviously, if he went down, he would have literally the highest upside of any handcuff there. Let's move on to the chat here real quick from C's. Why from C's on YouTube. I am up by 2 and I have AJ Brown. The problem is he has Hurts. Should I start Watson instead? Yeah, that is frustrating. It's tough and I don't know a way around that, but the problem is that if you Christian Watson does not have the same upside that AJ Brown has. It is possible, theoretically possible, that AJ Brown catches a couple touchdowns, has a really strong performance, and maybe we get some turnovers there from Jalen Hurts, and those touchdowns that he throws are exclusively to AJ Brown, and maybe you can push ahead there. If there's a good low volume game, we could also have the potential there. Like maybe this is a Saquon game, which is possible, right? Because Green Bay has been a little generous from time to time against the run here. They've improved their defense, but again, so if this is a Saquon game and we get the passes funneled specifically to AJ Brown, the math can technically work out to where you could win. I would still play AJ Brown over Christian Watson just because Watson does not offer the same ceiling, unfortunately. From DR, is Bijan going to be a bust rest of season with Algier taking goal line opportunities? No, I don't think so. And I actually think that I think Bijan is a good buy low right now. I've seen a lot of people floating around wanting to sell off Bijan Robinson. So technically speaking, I mean it's tough to be a buy low when you were literally drafted 1 or 2 overall in fantasy drafts. But at this point, fantasy managers are frustrated. So quite frankly, you can go out and purchase him for a very reasonable price right now. So he's actually a buy low for me. Again, when we're looking at Atlanta, the problem is that, yeah, Algier's getting goal line opportunities, but it's not the same destitute situation as Kenneth Walker is facing in Seattle here. So I'm still good with Bijan. From JG, I need a wide receiver bad. Who should I draw or should I drop Zacchaeus for? Oh, you need to pick up. So if you've got Zacchaeus, honestly, obviously my ideal situations, depending on how deep your league is, where, obviously our preferences are guys like Parker Washington, Tej Johnson, Alec Pierce and whatnot. But and now technically you can't use Alec Pierce this week. But I will say you might want to take your chances there and go grab the guy that we first talked about in Jaden Higgins, because I know for sure he is out there. Nobody is rostering him at this point, extremely low rostered. And quite frankly, rest of season, he definitely would have higher upside than Zacchaeus. So yeah, for sure. That one makes a lot of sense there. And then from Mutton, what do we think about Travion Henderson? So Travion Henderson, the way that he has performed, you can't, especially this past game, the breakaway runs there, the upside that he offered there. I do not believe that they can put the genie back in the bottle on that one. I think he will operate. Let's say Ramondre Stevenson returns. I do think they'll still have some level of a committee. Again, the one thing that we saw with Travion Henderson in this past matchup is that he did struggle at the goal line, unfortunately. So don't be shocked if Ramondre Stevenson comes back and we do get Ramondre Stevenson at the goal line. But at this point, I would think that the majority of carries would stick with Travion Henderson. So he's going to have to be like rookie season Gibbs, right? Where unfortunately if you're going to score, you got to score from like the 20 or something, because once they get inside the 10, you're not going to have that opportunity. Luckily, he does have the talent to do so. And again, we don't know how long this toe injury is going to keep Henderson out. We also have Terrell Jennings that went down with an injury as well. So technically speaking, Travion Henderson is in a good position with all the injuries around him. So we feel super good about him as a must start here for sure. All right, I'm going to do a couple more. Let's finish off our list. And then we'll go to the chat to round things off here. Moving on to the next player on my list, it is Tyjae Spears. Tyjae Spears, who we haven't seen in a while because he was coming off a bye week there. This is an interesting one, right? Because the Titans backfield is a factual committee, and that is not going to change. So you might be wondering why I am advocating for picking up or trading for, depending, he might be on waivers, he might be someone that you have to trade for. It's kind of in that rough day. You see 36% roster there. Why am I advocating for a committee back here? Well, I am advocating for a committee back here because beggars can't be choosers when it comes to running backs at this point. And as far as committees go, this is probably the safest committee in terms of having a safe floor and a decent ceiling. Again, we're talking about fantasy managers out there starting Jordan Mason, who his role has just been diminished to nothing with the return of Aaron Jones. Guys still starting out or out there starting Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who gives us no upside. At the very least, with Tajay Spears, we know we have a decent ceiling there, and we have a pretty good floor here. Again, and the reason for that is because Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard are the exact same person. They have overlapping skill sets. They can both run on early downs. They both contribute as wide receivers. They both get goal line work. And the Titans use them interchangeably, and that's a good thing, right? Because we don't get them pigeonholed into specific roles where, oh my gosh, if the Titans are playing from behind, they're going to give more volume to this running back. No, because they can both do the exact same thing. So neither one of them is ever pushed out of the game script here. And again, for us, that might not be the worst thing in the world because we know that he can give us a certain level of volume on a weekly basis here. Excluding the first game, obviously, we had the high ankle sprain for Tajay Spears that kept him out through the first several weeks there. Then he came back in week 5. He was on a very low snap count, eased back in clearly. So we ignore week 5. So we start looking at Tajay Spears in week 6. Week 6, he took on a bigger role and was the most productive running back in the backfield. Week 7, Pollard took back the title, but it was still a solid week for Tajay Spears, very decent floor there. Week 8, we had a fantastic performance, a 17 fantasy point performance there from Tajay Spears. That's lead back numbers, RB1 numbers for us. And then in week 9, it was a very even matchup there, and he got 9 fantasy points, a nice little floor there. Again, when we're out there struggling with guys that are giving us zero upside, rostering Tajay Spears over guys that just give us absolutely nothing and, don't have any kind of receiving upside is the better route to go here. Moving on to our last player here. This is my favorite one. I'm not going to lie. That's why I saved him for last here. It's Tez Johnson. Tez Johnson, the official wide receiver too of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Believe in it, people. Believe in it and invest into it. He is criminally under rostered right now. He should not be on waivers at all. And if there's someone in your fantasy league that has them on his bench or his or her bench and they're not using him, you need to go grab him right away here because we're still waiting on that timeline for Bucky Irving here. Our trust level with Tampa Bay has gone down the gutter, unfortunately, but they did give us a timeline on Chris Godwin. Whether or not we believe it, I don't know. But they claim it's late November, early December here. And again, I don't know how much trust we can actually put into that. But again, that puts us at Godwin's return like around the fantasy playoffs. That's a long way away, people here. So if you're pushing to make the playoffs, Tez Johnson is giving you solid fantasy output here, and you cannot ignore that just for the potential that Chris Godwin could come back around the fantasy playoffs here. Again, looking at when Tez Johnson became an actual starter, that was week 6. The Bucs have played 4 games since then. Again, none of them have been layup matchups. So this is not production that is coming from him being in excellent matchups and going off against Dallas or Washington or something. No, he's done this in a wide variety of matchups, and he's done this in a couple of matchups where Baker Mayfield struggled significantly here. I say all that to say that the production that he has had recently of 9 to 20 fantasy points in every single game since becoming a starter and 4 touchdowns over that span, that is highly impressive here. Baker Mayfield is a high volume quarterback. Emeka Egbuka is the wide receiver 1. We're not denying that here, but Sterling Shepard doesn't exist. Kate Otten is great though. But Tez Johnson here, the touchdown equity that he offers here, it's a must roster here. He is a solid weekly flex option, and they do have some high volume matchups coming up here. And again, do we trust the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? No, we do not. We don't trust the timelines they give up. So if Godwin does not come back until potentially the playoffs for Tampa Bay, if he's not back for our fantasy playoffs, the matchups for Tampa Bay in the fantasy playoffs are Atlanta, Carolina, and Miami. Again, Atlanta is tougher against wide receiver 1s. It's a good matchup for Taz. Carolina's defense has fallen apart, and Miami has been a very positive matchup in general for wide receivers. Johnson's rest of season potential here, fantastic. Moving on, let's close things out with the chat here from Bobby. Ooh, thoughts on Brian Thomas Jr. rest of season. I'm scared for him, and that's why I like Parker Washington. Arguably, I could have put Parker Washington on this list as well here. I'm concerned. The problem is that we only saw that one big wide receiver 1 performance from him, and outside of that, he hasn't given us a true wide receiver one performance. He hasn't looked like that. I mean, the good thing there is that we don't ultimately have a timeline on Travis Hunter there. Obviously we know when he would be eligible to come off IR, but they didn't say he would be coming off IR as soon as he is eligible to return here. So that said, he should come back to volume, but I've got concerns for him rest of season, especially since they seemed very intentional about giving looks to Jacoby Myers as well. Had a touchdown that was called back from a penalty. So yeah, if you've got somebody that is interested in Brian Thomas Jr., it might be a bailout situation. I don't have a ton of confidence in him rest of season. From Mr. Say, is it time to drop Calvin Ridley? Well, if you've been holding on through the injuries, realistically, this would be like the third game here. So theoretically, he could be back in this week. If there's something better on waivers, like if I would drop him for, quite frankly, would drop him for several of the guys that we talked about. But if we're looking at waiver wire ads, I would drop him for a Parker Washington. I would drop him to pick up a JJ McCarthy. I would drop him to pick up a Tez Johnson for sure. So yeah, if you need to drop him to pick up something else, because again, we saw Alec Maynor perform at a high level. We saw Tim Radike, who I love, by the way, has looked fantastic. So there's more competition in there than you would think, and it's not a positive situation for the offense from a pass perspective from Cam Ward there. From Paula from YouTube. Do you think that I can get Bijan for Brees and Sutton? I think you might. Well, Sutton is a problem in that, but a Sutton-esque player, yes. I don't know if someone might potentially think they might be buying low on Sutton, but Sutton's perception right now is really off now that we've had Troy Franklin come. So I think that's the right formula. You might have to tweak it to someone who is very similar to Sutton, but yeah, that type of trade, I think realistically someone might accept there. And then for Marvin, what is up with DJ Moore? DJ Moore, so he was in and out of the game with a shoulder injury. That is no excuse for the 0 fantasy points. That was all on him. That was not related just to the injury there. We saw him come back down the prior week. That was an outlier performance and a great matchup. It came in, the touchdowns. He passed for a touchdown. He, caught a touchdown and he rushed for a touchdown. It was just an outlier game, unfortunately. His ceiling this season has, outside of that one game, has been 12 fantasy points. That's the expectation at max that I have for him on a weekly basis, with a single-digit fantasy point floor, unfortunately. So I am concerned about DJ Moore, and we do have to monitor that shoulder issue. So, Luther Burden might be on the table if DJ Moore's shoulder injury turns out to be something that he can't play through. We'll get more details on it, but, a la a Xavier Worthy, who was out for a couple of weeks there. But yeah, thank you guys so much. That wraps things up. Really good chat here. Let's recap real quick. We had Jaden Higgins as a first guy that we talked about there, ascending rookie within that Texans offense there. If he can push ahead and assert himself above Xavier Hutchinson here, we can feel really good about him potentially rest of season. It was good to see him finally showcase as a true wide receiver 2 when Nico Collins was active and had a fantastic day. Then we have Malik Washington there in Miami. Again, this is a PPR specific ad. If you're in standard or half PPR, he doesn't offer the upside that you need because he is a lower ADOT guy. He's not going to get a ton of yardage. So we're depending on receptions and touchdowns, but the touchdowns have come, and Miami has literally one of the best playoff schedules as well here. So Malik Washington has real upside rest of season, specifically in PPR. Then Theo Johnson, who has been dominating as a true tight end 1, great connection with Jackson Dart, has finished with a minimum of 10 fantasy points in every game outside of the 2 matchups with Philadelphia since Jackson Dart became a starter there. We trust him. If you're looking for somebody with high upside, that is definitely one to add rest of season. Then we had JJ McCarthy that we talked about here, has all the things that we love: big arm, ton of weapons, and rushing upside, the formula for a QB1, even on low volume, right? Then we had Tyler Algier, the most elite handcuff that you can get out there on waivers right now, offering you a little bit of standalone value as well as he gets those goal line touchdowns. And then Tajay Spears, if you are looking for somebody who you can rely on for a decent floor with a high, decently, actually oddly high ceiling of around 17 fantasy points, despite being in a committee, because he's got that receiving upside there. That's someone who offers a solid floor that you can actually trust to start in a committee. And then finally, Tez Johnson, we just talked about him, the true wide receiver 2 there in Tampa Bay there. We know at some point, supposedly, Chris Godwin will be back, but we've got several weeks until that is going to happen. Multiple games here. You need to take advantage of him. The touchdown equity that he has shown in the connection with Baker Mayfield this early as a rookie, it's just building there. He's very, very talented. But that wraps things up, guys. Again, make sure that you have all your alerts on from Bleacher Report because we are closing in on the fantasy playoffs. You got to stay alert. We've got all those injuries coming up as well. And then make sure that you are tuned into the Fantasy Football Show. And I'll be with you all season long to wrap things up here every single Monday. And of course, you can find me across social media at It's Tara Time. And as always, have a fantastic week. Good luck with your lineups. I hope you win because we got a lot of matchups hinging on this Monday night game here. So good luck with your fantasy lineups tonight. I will talk to you again next week.